A massive multinational crackdown on India-based international crime. It's called Operation Hardball. 37 people have been charged with 24 arrested, including 3 Canadians in the Vancouver area. The indictments were filed with U.S. courts in California. They span 3 major gangs, active, police say, in big operations. Crimes involving murders, shootings, extortions, kidnappings, and drug trafficking. Today's crackdown includes charges against the leader of a gang who police say ordered the assassination of Canadian Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in 2023.
Set forth in the indictment include allegations that Lawrence Bishnoi and Goldie Brar directed the 2023 assassination of a prominent Sikh leader in Canada. The gang used this assassination and other high-profile acts of violence to terrorize Sikh and other Indian communities, and they used acts of violence to legitimize and bolster widespread extortion schemes.
Lisa Moreland is the RCMP Deputy Commissioner, and she joins me now. Deputy Commissioner, thank you for your time on a busy day.
Thank you for the opportunity.
There's a lot in this operation, a lot of arrests, but the big one that jumps out to me is the charge of Lawrence Bishnoi for ordering the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. It's long been suspected, now it's a formal charge. How significant is that for the RCMP?
First of all, I just want to thank you again for being here. Significant, I would say that as discussed today in the conference, is that the RCMP with the FBI and our other partners, and I would say our other partners include all police force across Canada that helped in this arrest and bringing this forward today. I think this arrest is very significant, not only here in Canada, but around the world.
But it's Mr. Mr. Bishnoi that has been charged, along with one of his right hands, Satinderjeet Singh, known as Goldie Brar. How important is it to limit the capacity of the Bishnoi gang to have the leadership charged in this?
I think when you take this in totality, like you said, from transnational organized crime, the leadership, being able to take out the leadership, not only the top person, but the next layer down is significant in order to disrupt how they operate. And like I said, working with our partners across Canada, coast to coast, and being able to tackle this as trans-organized crime unfolds, taking out that leadership, and we have at the POJ, the local police of jurisdiction, working on their level. I think this is a major blow to this organization.
So Lawrence Bishnoi, he is widely believed to be the leader behind a lot of the criminal activity targeting the South Asian diaspora community in Canada. Like, this is the organization mostly responsible for, we believe, the extortion and intimidation and violence in the lower mainland of British Columbia, parts of Alberta, the GTA, Brampton, those areas. That's the organization we're talking about here, correct?
That is correct, and like I said, I think that taking this blowout and working with our POJs is massive, not only for here in Canada, but across the world. And I think that a key message today is that every organization came together to tackle this Bishnoi, because organized crime today, especially trans-organized crime, has moved into the digital space. And when you move into that digital space, it makes crime borderless. So essentially, by us all working together, we've been able to tackle this at the highest level. Okay,
so Lawrence Bishnoi is obviously the leader of the gang, but Lawrence Bishnoi is already in jail. He's in prison in India, and he has been able to run this criminal organization from an Indian prison using either smuggled cell phones or, as I believe some of the American documents would suggest, voice over internet phones. How does this charge stop that from continuing? Because he's still in an Indian prison right now and presumably would still be able to resort to some of these old tactics to steer the direction of his criminal organization.
So what I think is that the charges that were brought forward today, obviously under the RICO laws in the United States, it brings through that, as stated today, that they will bring him forward for extradition to get him moved forward and to face charges in the United States.
Okay, so this is something one of the U.S. officials said at the press conference today, that they want to get him out of the Indian prison system and get him into essentially a federal supermax or a real high security facility, essentially cutting him off from all of this access. That would be the key way to completely disrupt his leadership, I suppose.
I think that that's one component of it, and I think it's another component as a part of doing these investigations. You learn intelligence and how people are operating, and to your point of how was he able to operate. And I think by taking that intelligence, all law enforcement here in Canada, you're able to take things that you've learned from that to adapt to how people such as Lord Bishnoi are able to operate while they're in the jails.
So where does this leave the organization in Canada if the leadership does get extradited and goes to the United States? And the suggestion today was that the Indian government was cooperating, or Indian law enforcement was cooperating with this investigation. Where does this leave the operation in Canada? Because I think it was last year or earlier this year, Bishnoi sent a letter to Canadian police saying they have 1,000 foot soldiers ready to commit violent acts in their name. I mean, is that number Canadian? Is that global? How serious is the operation here? And do you think it could persist at some level of efficiency with Mr. Bishnoi maybe being moved to a U.S. prison?
So what I can say to you in relation to your question about that is the key part about this being transnational, and we've taken out the upper part of the leadership. As with any leadership, when you take it out, there's that phase. And I would say it's not just Bishnoi, and I really think we need to focus in on that. We took out the next layer underneath. And working with our partners, as you mentioned, that we've had incidents of extortions across this country, is that the police forces of jurisdictions, the chiefs of police have been working diligently with the RCMP to tackle this at all levels. By removing the Bishnoi and his senior leadership from there, we believe it's going to have a direct impact on public safety here in Canada and abroad.
But, you know, that 1,000 foot soldiers willing to carry out shootings, that is alarming to me. I am not an expert on the state of this gang and its criminal capacity. I mean, is that a Canadian number? Is that the sort of scale that law enforcement and people in the South Asian diaspora are dealing with because of this?
I would say to you, as mentioned in the press conference, as you know today, is that they're using, and through the indictments that you talk about that were put publicly today, is that these organized crime groups are targeting our youth. And I think a key component of that is, yes, to your point, is 1,000 foot soldiers, but they need to be directed by somebody. By taking out this leadership and working through our partners at tackling it, the onion will, so to speak, of how organized crime is set up, I think it will have a direct impact on how this moves forward in Canada and elsewhere.
There's a lot of details on the onion, as you describe it, all the layers of organization and criminality, how they recruit disaffected young people from economically difficult situations. There's the Bishnoi gang, there's the Bangwa Purnia gang, which targets corrupt officials. There's another drug trafficking group, the Donda group, that was arrested in British Columbia. But I wonder if you've learned anything in this investigation about the allegation that former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made when he stood in Parliament and said agents of the Indian government were believed to have a connection to the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Has anything on that come out in this investigation?
Well, I can comment, David, as you're aware, there's current people in Canada that are facing charges on that, so I can't comment in relation to that investigation, but I can say, as you know, there's ongoing. In relation to this matter today, as stated in the press conference, there's no evidence to suggest that through this organized crime investigation and the charges and the indictment laid forward, that Indian officials were charged or were involved in this investigation.
Okay, so nothing has come out in these indictments that would speak to what the former Prime Minister had to say?
No, and what I would add, David, as you know, that as with any good arrest, there's over 50 search warrants that were conducted today, so various intelligence and evidence will be collected through there and devices, and the investigation is ongoing. But I firmly state, as you know, that nothing has come out today to link the Indian government.
Okay, the other group that has a direct Canadian connection, and Commissioner Duham actually described, he talked about the Canadian Ravinder Singh Donda as a high-value target over the past few years. And he is accused of alleged drug trafficking networks using commercial trucks and farm trucks, hundreds of pounds, hundreds of kilos of cocaine and methamphetamine each and every week. Why was Ravinder Singh Donda such a high-value target for the RCMP, for the Commissioner to name him like that?
I think that the key part, as you said, about the three different groups, and this individual, again, not into that extortion aspect in it, but in relation to moving high value amount of weight of drugs up through the system, through U.S. and across to Canada. So this investigation in totality, his investigation has saved millions of lives here in Canada by stopping the flow of these drugs. Hence the reason why he was so important to us. But I will add, as you know, even the Bishnoi gang and the three gangs, they were all involved in narcotics. And so the collection of work that was done today and the amount of flow of drugs to stop coming across the borders, again, that international piece that we spoke of how these organizations are borderless, therefore this impacting the RCMP.
Yeah, when you go through the details, I mean, there's obviously the very high-profile assassination of Mr. Nijjar. There's the shooting at a home of a well-known actor. There's ripping off other drug dealers for their supply as part of the criminal activities of the Bishnoi gang laid out in these indictments. But I just wonder, these three gangs, all with connections to India, but not connected to each other, at least in an operational sense. Just what does that tell us about just how widespread sort of the transnational element of this criminal activity is in Canada and the United States? Because each one of these in isolation is a significant criminal enterprise.
And I think that's what brought the significance of this totality of this announcement today of these 37 indictments that took place and the 24 that have been arrested to date. I think to your question of the significance of the impact, I think the thing that we need to focus in on is that part about technology and how the world has just made everybody so interconnected. So you can just imagine that's how organized crime is operating. Therefore, using this technology and being borderless, whether that be interprovincial or international. And I think that the key message here is no one agency can tackle these types of organized crimes by themselves. Therefore, the partnerships that we've developed here in Canada with all the police force, as well as our international, and then obviously the RCMP with our large international footprint all over the world, collaborating everybody to tackle these. And I think the key message here is that no matter where you rest in the world, we will come after you with the tools that we have developed to tackle organized crime.
Just as a final point, Deputy Commissioner, you know, the people in the Surrey area, you know, the lower mainland of BC, in Brampton, parts of it, like, you know, the areas that have been targeted by these groups so aggressively. I mean, how should they feel about these operations, in particular the targeting of the Bishnoi gang, who has been driving so much of that extortion? I mean, how much safer should this help make things for these communities?
I think that it will help make them safer from, like you said, the Surreys, and what's happened took place in Edmonton, obviously in Brampton as well. But I will add, there's been amazing work done by the local police forces there to tackle these challenges. And I think that the message should be to them that this goes to show that law enforcement is connected from coast to coast in Canada as well as international and all over the world to ensure that we bring these people to justice. No matter where they lie or where they commit your crime, like you said, two of these individuals are currently in custody. It just goes to show that they're not, you can't hide, we will find you.
So India cooperated with this investigation. Were they cooperating? The United States has a way of getting people to cooperate that maybe Canada struggles to get. And this has been one of the frustrations politically and from law enforcement, that India hasn't always cooperated with Canada in these things. Did we see an improvement in that? Because they're trying to reestablish relations and trade. There was a promise of better cooperation on law enforcement and security. Is the RCMP seeing that?
What I can say to you is in this investigation, as you noted from our U.S. partners, that the Indian government was cooperating in this investigation. We worked shoulder and shoulder with the FBI and other agencies to address this. So I would say that through the course of this investigation, it would highlight that that's where we're striving for.
Deputy Commissioner Lisa Moreland of the RCMP, we appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much. Take care.
American authorities have charged 37 people across the United States, Canada, and Europe. Amongst them are the leaders of the Lawrence Bishnoi gang, including the man police say ordered the 2023 assassination of Canadian Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in British Columbia.
Some of the most cruel and wide-reaching criminals whose crimes range from kidnapping to extortion to murder to shootings to arson to drug trafficking. Our work today makes our communities, cities, provinces, states, and countries much safer.
So this comes after Canada had accused agents of the Indian government of some involvement in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and the two countries have since begun to thaw relations, with Indian law enforcement officials actively collaborating, it seems, with their Canadian counterparts in this, but more likely with the Americans. Earlier in the show, I asked the RCMP Deputy Commissioner about that.
There's no evidence to suggest that through this organized crime investigation and the charges and the indictment laid forward that Indian officials were charged or were involved in this investigation. The Indian government was cooperating in this investigation. We worked shoulder and shoulder with the FBI and other agencies to address this. So I would say that through the course of this investigation, it would highlight that that's where we're striving for.
So Priya, the headline in this for me is the leader of the Lawrence Bishnoi gang, Lawrence Bishnoi, has been formally charged with ordering the assassination of Mr. Nijjar. Widely thought, but now officially in the indictment in California. And the U.S. authorities are going to seek his extradition to the U.S. because they say he can still run his criminal organization, as has been pretty clear, from an Indian jail, and he will not be able to do that in the facility they want to put him in the United States. What do you make of this development that was rolled out today?
So honestly, from my perspective, I think this opens up a lot more questions about Nijjar's murder and the general state of foreign interference and transnational crime and repression in Canada than it does provide any answers. Because, you know, to your point about the Indians being much more, presumably cooperative with the Americans, I mean, we know that in February of this year, an Indian national pled guilty in a U.S. federal court for a murder for hire plot of an American Sikh activist. And he said that he was straight up working at the direction of an Indian government employee. American officials in that investigation uncovered text messages from this man who pled guilty where he was boasting about Nijjar's murder. So how are those two not connected? And I would, I think it's incumbent upon the RCMP to sort of explain that to Canadians, because all we've been hearing from officials, whether it's, you know, PCO officials stating there's no foreign interference happening anymore, and then the head of the RCMP saying there's no transnational repression happening anymore, and then we get some level of backtracking of those original statements, we still don't have any clear answers as to where things actually stand. And then on the political side of things, what we're largely getting from the government is pablum about working together with law enforcement. And that's all well and good, I guess, but I would just remind viewers that if we're to take the word of the Indians here, including the Indian High Commissioner, there was never any involvement whatsoever of India at all. And the RCMP basically made up the allegations. So it's not even really clear what the Canadian side is working with their Indian counterparts on if the Indian side won't even admit there's something worth investigating to begin with.
No, and look, and that is a good point about the lack of specifics. So in fairness to the Deputy Commissioner, when I did ask her about this, she said, look, there are people charged in Canada for this crime, so I can't speak to specifics. So they are constrained, so we'll see what comes out in the court process. But I do take your point. But, you know, Nathan, I guess the challenge I have is when former Prime Minister Trudeau made his statement in the House of Commons, it was agents of the Indian government. That could mean any number of things. Like one of the people charged in this in connection with another gang is a police chief in India, right? So is that an agent of the Indian government? Are we talking political staff? Are we like, I don't know what it means. That to Supriya's point, right? But here they are. They now formally have charged the Bishnoi leadership and the right hand, which is not insignificant to think.
So two things, lo and behold, working internationally and cooperatively is a good idea. The Americans today are standing with us and those in Europe and maybe a little bit of India, we're not sure, in terms of shutting, like, let's look at the end product of this, massive smuggling of some of the most dangerous, toxic, and lethal drugs, the extortion, murder for hire. I mean, these are the worst of the worst, and it's crossing borders and boundaries, so you need to work cooperatively with others. We worked with the Americans who made arrests here, and they did their part there in Europe, et cetera. So cooperation, counter to the U.S. current administration view, is actually really positive if you want to keep people safe. Secondly, the questions that you're raising, as Priya is raising, are really important ones because, in particularly, the Indo-Canadian community here has been put under huge stress and risk and threat. We've seen the shootings and we've seen everything, murder. And knowing exactly what is the Indian side of this, and is there an actual connection back, we'll see if any of those extradition requests from the U.S. come forward. Lastly, this plays into the Trump-Modi relationship, which is not great right now. If Mr. Trump was a little bit of a more decent human being and you could work it out, maybe you could get an extradition case, but I think that's a bit of a faint hope. And ultimately, justice isn't served when we can't get to the very answers that the two of you were just discussing.
Yeah, and just on your point about the Bishnoi, there's three gangs disrupted by this today. not connected with each other. Bishnoi is largely extortion, violence, and murder allegations. There's also the Donda group, which is what you referenced. They were the ones charged with bringing drugs from the United States into Canada, I would point out.
Fascinating.
Yes, hundreds of kilograms of cocaine and methamphetamine each week from the U.S. into Canada is the allegation, using farm trucks and semi-trailers. But so, Lisa, it is a significant law enforcement activity. Who knows what the geopolitical consequences will be out of all this? What are your thoughts on what we learned today?
So I like Nathan, I have two takeaways. Number one, I don't think Canadians would have heard about any of this, but for the fact that they unsealed the indictment in the United States, because I think that we tend to be held sheltered from all of these kinds of real life bad things that are happening with respect to gangs and organized crime and money laundering and drugs and all that stuff. We are not immune from what happens around the world, and we've got a clear view of that today. And I think the second thing I would say that I don't blame the United States for wanting to have these criminals or alleged criminals extradited to see their punishment in their court system, because for a lot of this stuff, the mandatory minimum is life in prison. And we don't have that kind of punishment here in Canada when it comes to these allegations or these crimes. So I'm hopeful that there will be asks for extradition, because I do believe that some deterrence is absolutely needed in this case. And you have to be shown that if you do this, you're going to be punished severely, and it's not worth it.
Go ahead, Jason. You're looking to
just
jump
to
in?
be clear, I was curious, about the extradition request to India. Right? Because the gang leader is still running his gang. This wasn't a question of what is the punishment necessarily, but if we're actually trying to understand and stop what is going on, clearly the Indian prison system hasn't been up to the task. The Americans are probably a lot more confident with that happening in their prison system.
Yeah, and Supriya, I'll give you the last 60 seconds, but just on that point for Nathan, for the people at home, is Lawrence Bishnoi's been in jail for years, but he runs the operation out of an Indian prison using smuggled cell phones or voice over internet phone, VoIP protocols that he's able to get access to. And the Americans have said, enough is enough, Supriya. We want to get him over here. And the official said today is that he's not going in some state prison, which he said is like a day camp where they're just walking around. He's going in a federal prison where essentially, I don't know, he'll be locked in an iron cage. So I don't know, the last 40 seconds to you, Supriya, on that point.
Yeah, and I mean, look, again, from previous statements that have been made from our own RCMP, which would have been in like October of 2024. So again, like, we're working on some old information, but they had also connected agents of the Indian government working with the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. So again, it just, to me, this just opens up way more questions than it does provide any answers. And to everybody's points that have been made on the panel, like, the Indo-Canadian community right now is kind of suffering quite a bit with a lot of rampant crime. And it seems like it's not, hopefully this puts a damper in it. But I think our community deserves to know whether or not our people are safe.
Well, just as a last word before we say goodbye, there are many challenges with the U.S. legal system, but disclosure of information in their indictments and their evidence process is not one of them. So a lot of stuff's going to come out that you will get through the Americans that you'd never get in a Canadian court until the trial's over. All right, we got to leave it there. Supriya Dwivedi, Lisa Raitt, and Nathan Cullen, thank you so much.